welcome to the special CNBC Africa broadcast. I'm Nozi Pombanjwa. We're bringing you a conversation from Centurion, South Africa, where the Gauteng Premier David Makhura is hosting the Intra-Africa Trade and Investment Indaba. This is a continuous conversation where the Premier leads a conversation in collaboration with the diplomatic corps. And in focus today is what is the role of government in strengthening, accelerating and deepening trade, investment and regional integration. For now, though, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We are joined by Ambassador Sethloke. Ambassador Sethloke is the head of the Africa desk at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation in South Africa, and he joins us as one of the lead speakers in this conversation. And next to the ambassador is the CEO of the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, Mr. Saki Zamxaka. And of course, next to Mr. Zamxaka, we're joined by the head of Public Corporate and Investment for Barclays, Madam Zienzi Musamirapamwe. And last but certainly not least, we are joined by Madam Lerato Mataboge from the Department of Trade and Industry in South Africa, and overlooking Trade Invest, a unit within the DTI, and in particular with a focus on the African continent. Thank you very much for making the time to join us here today. Now, Ambassador, as you will agree, we're not starting from scratch. The conversation on deepening trade, on deepening investment and regional integration is not a new conversation in the context of Africa. But perhaps just bring us up to speed in terms of the most significant milestones that are at the moment defining and shaping the trade and investment trends that we're seeing on the continent.
No, thank you very much for being invited to this gathering. I would like to first start apologizing on behalf of my minister, who has traveled abroad from Lusaka. He went elsewhere. That he has been invited. Unfortunately, she cannot be here. But also to extend my appreciation to the Premier for having noticed that the province cannot deal without the national government. And then also that DTI also plays a very important role in all these other facets of investments in the continent. You have rightfully said it that within DTI we have what we call a trade and investment TISA, which Madame Mataboge, I know for quite a number of years, she has been running with this project, and which I think it has come at the right time. Now, from the government perspective, our foreign policy, it hinges on the Africa development. And the development of the continent, we have realized as the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, that South Africa cannot develop in isolation. And then what we have done as government, we have insisted to our heads of missions that what is important on our program, our annual program, we have to have what we call economic diplomacy. Because government has realized that we have dealt with the political interaction with countries. What is important for us to do now is to deal with investment and trade. And whilst I'm talking about this, we also have what we have, the Premier has referred to within the continent, which is a legacy that Dr. Nkosazana Zuma has left after he left the AU, which we called Agenda 2063. Now, the Agenda 2063, it informs the continent as to what do we want to do to renew ourselves. It moves from the premise of NEPAD, the New Economic Partnership for Development, which was initiated by former President Thabo Mbeki, President Obasanjo, and President Bouteflika of Algeria. That time, the continent didn't understand what these trade leaders were talking about. They were basically saying it is time for Africa to stand on its own, to have the Africa that we want. Surprisingly and interestingly enough today, Agenda 2063 hinges on NEPAD. And now NEPAD also, it's got its own mechanism to review how countries are implementing the programs, which is called the APRM, the African Peer Review Mechanism. And of course, as we may know that in the continent, we are still lacking on some democratization of our institutions. And some countries, they're now coming forward to be reviewed. But having said that, as far as our government is doing, we are saying that we need to energize our business, because from where we are sitting, the premier way is sitting, cannot talking from competency that he can lure investors or take investors out of the country, but we need to engage business. And having had an opportunity to be posted elsewhere in the continent, we realize how important it is for getting our businesses outside to go and invest. Now, the economic diplomacy that we're talking about, it faces a challenge in the continent. Because what government is saying is that when we're out there, we must attract investments into the continent. Now, Ambassador Gabriel, she's posted to Ghana. How does he get Ghanaians to come and invest in South Africa? Now, we are saying we need to assist her to get investors from South Africa to Ghana to go and invest. We need to look at the spin-offs of such investments, because once we do that, then we have surplus production that our companies are doing, which at the end of the day, the proceeds of the investments come back into the country. And we leave a legacy of development in those countries. The opportunities that are there in the continent, they're amazing. Sometimes when I talk about South Sudan, people, they look at me and say, what are you talking about? People are fighting there. But if you look at the potential that is in that country, it's amazing. I was just talking to Mr. Eric Bragaman now to say in South Sudan, in the Yei area, people are penning gold, literally penning gold. And then he says, no, we can give you a machine that people can carry on their backs and go and mine. Because the residues of that soil of gold, there's a lot of deposits of gold in there. And I'm saying opportunities are very vast out there. But as government also, we insist that whilst investors are going to invest in the continent, our embassies, we need to say and identify our provinces that has to twin with a province in a country. For an example, which I think it would be far-fetched if I say, for now, I wanted to twin Johannesburg with Juba. Because when we twin with these parts of countries, we immediately identify projects that are viable, that we take our people to go and invest.
Right.
And then once you go and invest in those projects, we automatically take development in that area. And then that's where now we can also find stability and promote democracy in the countries that we invest in. Because as business, you cannot tell a business person to go and invest where there's an element of instability. Because the first thing that he asks is, if I put...
He's worried about the risk.
The risk. Now, what is good, whilst we're talking about the risk, we have the ECIC, which is a parastatal. I think Madam Mataboge will talk extensively on that one, which protects the investments of our people when they go and invest abroad. Whatever money you put for investment, then ECIC comes in and says, we assure you that your investments are protected. We have the Southern African Development Bank as an institution that also is being encouraged by government to invest outside the country. We have the Industrial Development Corporation, IDC, which its mandate is to invest outside. Now, we are moving now in a situation whereby these three institutions, they need to start to talk to business people, that we go out there as a consortium from South Africa.
Right. So Ambassador, you've put a lot of issues on the table, and I'm going to attempt to ensure that we don't lose any of those issues, and whilst we come back to you for more clarity. And one of these is that we're going to explore is the twinning, where we have seen some attempts in terms of city-to-city twinning. The Premier spoke about, Johannesburg being a zone of opportunity, or the province being a zone of opportunity, whilst also being a zone of tension at the same time. So how do we ensure that those twinning projects actually happen despite some of these tensions? And so we'll come back to some of those issues. But Mr. Zamxaka, let me come to you, because The ambassador has put quite a number of issues on the table that I'd like you to quickly reflect on. The most important of these is that he has highlighted the importance of government and business engaging. And we know that the GGDA sits almost as a bridge between government and business. So we know what the theory says. What has the experience on the ground been?
Thanks, Nozipo. I think following from what the Premier said is the intention of this annual meeting to talk about the things that we are doing. As the GGDA, really, our focus has been to do something. There's a lot of disagreements, there's a lot of talk, and our approach has been as practical as we possibly can. So in the past 12 months, for example, some engagements have happened in the continent and outside of the continent. The Premier led a delegation to Namibia. In that trip, we had the Council of Capital Equipment Exporters. We had Business Unity South Africa. And there were specific areas of interest prior to that, where the President of Namibia was here, said we're interested in energy, we're interested in mining, capital equipment. So we had a delegation that had specific interest in those areas. So the discussions were quite focused. Business went physically to view the factories and look at what the potential investments are. You now have discussions taking place. We went to Ghana. We were hosted by the High Commissioner. There's a follow-up visit that the Premier is going to have end of the month to Ghana and to Nigeria. And again, when we were in Ghana, we had a company which is a tile manufacturer that wanted to set up in Ghana, and they wanted to talk to the authorities about energy and what can be done. We met with the minister who was newly elected of Trade and Industry, who had actually spent some time in South Africa, spoke to us about their plan to industrialize and what they're looking at. The banks, Alison, who's the CEO of Standard Bank, was talking to us about getting a credit facility from the IDC. So again, very specific in the things that we're doing. We went to East Africa, Kenya and Rwanda. And again, we're learning a lot of things. Both countries are doing, the public service and how it's starting to be professionalized is something we're learning on in South Africa. Ghana, as I said, Kenya rather, they have what they call Huduma centers, which are service centers meant for citizens to cut their cost of doing business, because we often talk about business and cutting the cost of doing business for corporates, but me and you, when I lose a license, I must go to a police station to get an affidavit, I must go to a traffic department and get it written. So they're putting all of those things in one area. In one center, we went to Nairobi, there are 41 government services that you can get in one place. So you can literally decide in the morning, this is where I'm going to go. So really what we're saying is that, everybody has been talking about these strategies on intra-Africa trade. It's only going to happen when you do something. Yeah.
So I quickly want to jump in there because it certainly sounds like there's a lot of work that is being done in the background. But if we could capture the 2 or 3 big highlights or insights that you're saying, if these 3 things are present, we find that it's easier to do business across borders. It's easier to do business within a region where there might be multiple countries involved. What are those 2 or 3 big things that you think we would need to zoom in on critically and potentially replicate in other markets?
Actually, Nozipo, it's 2 or 3 small things, but very effective. One of them, movement of people. It's a disaster in the continent to move around. And again, East Africa has done it very well in the common market. And I think the rest of the continent can learn from it. It is quite big because goods follow people. You can't trade with a place you've never been into. So that's the first thing. The second one is that not only in the continent, everywhere in the world, everyone is talking about localization. You cannot want to do business in a country you do not know on your own. It is to your interest to have local partners, but other than that, in the same way in South Africa, we talk BE, we talk localization and many other forms. Wherever you go, try and develop where you are. You can no longer do business anywhere in the world on the basis of short-term profit, and you come in, you make money, and you leave. And we encourage our business people who get into the continent to be sensitive to that, not because it's a social thing to do, but because it is good for business as well. Because we found in some areas, some South African businessmen have bad reputation. So it does not help the image of the country when our business practices aren't what we would promote when we're at home.
And so this legacy of development that Ambassador speaks about becomes very secondary.
And then the other thing, I mean, is usual stuff about risk, about regulation, about standards and harmonizing. And that's why where you're seeing a lot of real activity, SADC on its own is a market of almost 300 million people. ECOWAS and what they've done in creating a common market makes it easy for people to move. Actually, I spoke to the ambassador of Rwanda, Vincent. They've done some research on what have been the benefits of the common market. I think tourism has gone up by more than 30%. Data costs have gone down as a result of that. That region is growing on average 5–6%. And recently, when we attended a book launch, the book Making Africa Work, there are two numbers that were very interesting for me that came out of it. One is a projection that by 2050, the population in the African continent is going to be at 2 billion. We're now at about 1 billion. So it's gonna double in about 33 years. And they're saying in about 83 years, it would be at about 4 billion, the challenges of urbanization. But other than that, the real big thing that it means is that there is potential for growth.
Right.
We are a growing continent. If we average about 4–5% in less than 20 years, our GDP as a continent would have doubled. So that really is where the opportunities are, that you have a continent that is growing. It just needs men and women who have confidence in it, to put investment and are actually doing something.
So a number of issues, the movement of people, localization, harmonization, and growth, investment that is predicated on growth. I do know that the Managing Director of Tourism Finance Corporation in Kenya is with us. And so when we open up into the Q&A, I'd be really keen to get some inputs from you, Mr. Orunomoy, in terms of this particular conversation. But let me come to you, Madam Zienzi, because we are talking about a bank that has an excess of a footprint of 10 markets on the African continent, Barclays. And we've heard what the ideal might be in terms of policy and business meeting each other. We are aware of the 3 little things with high impact that Mr. Zamxaka has put on the table. I'm keen to find out from a bank with ambition to work across markets in the African continent, the experience of being able to do that in a way that makes economic and financial sense for the institution, and if that also enables a development legacy for the bank to take into consideration as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the key points that have been raised, they are very key, but I think we probably just need to start off from a premise where we are saying Africa is rising. Africa is not going to rise without us rising together. And I kind of like the theme, together moving forward. Now we have to work as a collective where business, civil society, as well as government will need to move together as one. Now, as Barclays, we are very clear in terms of our strategy on the continent, looking at where the continent is going. Cities are going to grow. From about 1,500 to about 3,000. Now with cities growing, rapid urbanization, more people coming into cities, what is going to happen? Now we are kind of seeing pockets of excellence here and there, but I think there's a need for that integration and collaboration to come together. How do we get people across the continent and maybe industry leaders to have more like a forum that is more like a working forum where we are able to actually share the kind of opportunities that are there across the continent and how can we move forward. I know NEPAD has been trying to drive that agenda. There have been early success stories, but we need to do more. Now, from a banking perspective, we are talking about investments. There's no shortage of funding. There is shortage of bankable projects. Now, how do we get the projects to a bankable stage? I think it has already been alluded that infrastructure is key. We can't talk about regional intra-trade without infrastructure. Infrastructure has to be there. We are talking about roads, we are talking about electricity, we are also talking about even air transportation.
Right.
I think there was a time when I was going to Morocco, I had to fly out of the continent to reconnect to the continent. So the air skies, they have to be opened up so that we are also looking at regional integration. And then the issue around cities. How can we as business support the cities working together with the local government? I can give you an example of what we have done with the Gauteng provincial government as well as the city of Tshwane. We've been driving Getting Ready to Work program, which is really how do we get the youth to be developed, to be mentored, so that they are ready to work. And there are some practical solutions, initiatives that we've been driving together with the cities. The city of Tshwane, the mayor had a problem with unemployment of the youth. How can you get the youth engaged? An unengaged youth is actually a social risk. It's a security risk. So we worked together with the mayor, the former mayor. We came up with a Tshwane 10,000 program. We're able to train about 9,000 plus youth and also help them connected to the big businesses who were actually providing services to the city. So those are the initiatives that we have been working with
So,
on
Madam,
the
there are
continent.
two issues that I think you've raised that are very important that I just want to stress test before we move on. You spoke a lot about infrastructure as a key enabler to business. Let's talk about policy infrastructure for a second. The room is filled with members of the diplomatic corps, policymakers in the main. As a business, what would you need to see from the side of government to ensure that we're moving towards a more coordinated, more harmonized policy infrastructure that allows you to work across cities and across regions?
The key point is harmonization of regulations. I can maybe highlight PPP frameworks. We are talking about public-private partnerships. Coming up with regulatory frameworks that can be applied across the continent. And of course, there will be specific customization to sovereign requirements. But it's very important to have a model law across the continent on PPPs. That's one area. And then the other area is we are talking about Pan-African Parliament. Pan-African Parliament, I think there is a need to actually have Pan-African Parliament to have teeth. Right.
So back to the institutions.
Back to the institutions.
I see Ambassador starts finding fluff on his pants. So we're going to come back to that because I think that's an important, important point. But I quickly just want to touch on the second one before I move on because I think you've raised something here. You make an example of Johannesburg and Tshwane as some of the cities, as just an example that you've worked with. The probability, going back to twinning, of working with cities in different markets, is that something that is on the horizon that can be done, or would we have to see a significant change in regulatory frameworks in order for that to be possible?
So there is a platform, which is the Africa Cities Alliance, which is a good platform. Conversations happen every 3 years.
Teeth? Does it have teeth?
Well, not necessarily, not really. But I think it's an issue of collaboration, sharing experiences. And we shouldn't only see South Africa as the only. I know we are talking Pan-African. It should not only be South Africa exporting, but there's also other markets that are doing very well that want to set up, maybe operations in South Africa. So there has to be that, reciprocal. And it is happening, but we need to see much of it. If you look at Ghana or maybe Cote d'Ivoire, they produce cocoa.
Yes.
And those are really the biggest producers of cocoa. but cocoa is going out of the continent into Europe, and it gets processed there and re-exported back to us. So we are now talking about industrialization. How do we then help and collaborate and start, getting the two big players in the cocoa industry? South Africa has got big industrial capacity. How can the two start talking to each other? Right, so I think it's a project that I would like to put on the table. And we as a bank, we are in Ghana, we've got presence in Ghana. Trade is really at the heart of what we do, and would like to see what can be bankable so as to enable that to happen. So that's another area. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Again, a number of really important issues that have been put on the table, but let's pick up on the reciprocity that Madame Zienzi has raised. And this is, of course, the fact that we're not just talking about trade out of Gauteng or South Africa into the continent. We've got to see inflows from other African markets. And maybe as a way of reflecting on that, you could just remind us very quickly the focus of Trade Invest and the role that Trade Invest then plays in ensuring that there's a two-way flow of investment and opportunities.
Thank you. Firstly, let me start by thanking Gauteng for this very important conversation. It's very timely as well for us as DTI. We've recently created Trade Invest Africa to address exactly the issues that have been put on the table today. But before I start, I think I must also just go back to reconfirming what our government's approach is to the continent, to contributing to raising the levels of intra-Africa trade, and most importantly, the negligible levels of intra-Africa investments, because that's another component that we need to be advocating for very strongly. We subscribe to what we call development integration as a government, and it's now been adopted as the AU, because we know that we can have all the conversations, but if we don't address the low levels of connectivity and infrastructure on our continent, regulatory and hard infrastructure, we will not reach the levels of trade that we need to. Similarly, the second pillar to this development integration is the industrialization pillar. We need to build manufacturing capacities on our continents, and we need to facilitate partnerships to do exactly that. And the third pillar that our development integration approach rests on is the market integration. And I must say, when we do an assessment of the continent, this is where we made the most headway. We've got regional economic blocks, we've negotiated free trade agreements, we've got some even have customs unions. So what we have as a barrier to intra-Africa trade is not necessarily tariffs. We have gone a long way as a continent to that. So in the absence of tariffs as barriers, what are the issues that are hampering us trading amongst ourselves? And of course we know the low levels of interconnectivity are a problem. If there's a country that's producing a particular product, to get it from market A to market B on the continent, it's a problem. Our infrastructure is set up in a way that our trade goes outward. That is still the condition. So we need to look at cross-border infrastructure projects, cross-border infrastructure investments. And again, second layer as well, the low levels of industrialization. If we don't have product to trade amongst ourselves, value-added products, again, we can't address the low levels of intra-Africa trade. So that is now where investments become important. DTI has created Trade Invest Africa to really pursue what we call an outward investment-led trade strategy to the continent. We are aware that we as South Africa cannot continue a relationship with our own continent where we just export products.
Right.
We need to have sustainable relations and partnerships. We need to invest in economies on the rest of the continent. So this is what Trade Invest Africa does, to work closely with business and financiers in South Africa to go and contribute and invest in infrastructure yielding projects, industrialization yielding projects. So what we do is we work closely with business and financiers to identify projects that then we can collaborate with our partners in. And another important point that came up as well is about whether or not there are bankable projects on the continent. See, this is where governments have to play a strategic role. How can we as governments, we need to have a conversation about how can we as government work with business to assist them in the project preparation phase of identifying projects, because that's where the high-risk funding is. And half the time, that's where government can step in. So that's what we're looking at as well. We've got an incentive in the DTI, Capital Project Feasibility Fund, to do exactly that. Mm-hmm. How do we scope, package, bring a project to feasibility, then bring business on board to implement those projects? So we as Trade in West Africa are that go-to unit, particularly when it comes to the continent. For business to come to us, let's identify projects, let's work together, and invest on our continent and develop this continent. Yeah.
So investing in infrastructure and large-scale infrastructure projects certainly seems to be a key area where strategic partnerships can really begin to unlock opportunities. But there are a number of issues that have come from the diplomatic corps that I think are important for us to engage on. I'm going to put some of these in themes together. Ambassador, the issue of the movement of people that was raised earlier. We've heard now the issue of the chief of Ghana, who sometimes has to call Ambassador Ntlingwana because of the issue of visas. And in the same vein, we're talking about investing in tourism. And we know that for tourists, a multiple country experience is going to be much more attractive than a single country experience. Let's talk frankly about where we are on the continent in terms of ensuring that we are lifting visas where they're not necessary and harmonizing within and amongst regions so that there's a greater movement of people, Africans and non-Africans, coming onto the continent.
Well, thank you very much for that contribution. And when the question of the free movement of persons in the continent was raised by Madame here, I had a fluff on my trousers. Because the recent Pan-African Parliament that ended up yesterday, this was an issue that was discussed, the free movement of persons in the continent. The challenge that us as government we are faced with, we looked at the essence of the free movements of persons. We wholly agree with the idea that we need to let our people come in and moving freely in the continent. But now we are faced with this issue of human trafficking. We are faced with all other sorts of issues that makes our home affairs to say, is it really necessary for us to ratify that protocol on the free movement of persons? When I interacted with the Department of Home Affairs, they said, this is a noble idea because we need this intra-trade processes in the continent. And you cannot have all these processes when you don't have free movement of people. Now the question is that I want to raise here is, us as SADC, we are still faced with the problem of ratifying the very free movement of persons protocol so that our people can freely move around. And now what we have done as government, we have looked into the East Africa community.
Yeah.
We have looked at the ECOWAS and say because these are three economic communities that are seen to be viable and are doing projects that they can be collapsed together. We have an arrangement with the three economic communities. Then we are saying, upon ratification of this agreement that we want to enter into now, within the three economic communities, then we need to start then introducing the free movement of persons. Because Ambassador Ntlingwana did indicate that we have this entourage of Ghanaians in the country here. I've just recently came back from Senegal. Senegalese want to come to South Africa to do business. And the gentleman that I met, he also wants South Africans to go to Ghana. Tourism, like Ambassador is indicating, is very important. When I was in Senegal, I went to the Gorée Island. I mean, if you go to Ghana, to Senegal, and then you don't go to the Gorée Island, you haven't been to Senegal. So these are some of the part of the issues that we need to bring up. But now, on the question of Pan-African Parliament having teeth, Madam, you can be rest assured that the recently ended Pan-African Parliament, when we go to Addis in July, is going to be given that big teeth to start biting, because you can't be a parliament when you cannot take decisions on your own. You have to refer to Addis and IDs has to mull about these issues. I like what my colleague said from the DRC. We have a very bankable project in the DRC, which is the Inga Dam. And you know, we have as government what we call binational commissions. In the continent, we have 5 binational commissions with, I would like to say, key countries, because ambassadors here, they'll take me to task. But of what we call strategic partners in the continent. The DRC is one of them. And I remember in 2007, when we went for elections in the DRC, we had to do everything so that we can see that country stabilizing, because this is one of the cornerstones of our foreign policy, to see Africa that is stable. And you cannot see Africa that is stable without investments. TISA, it has been in the continent, partnering with IGC. As Madame has said now, that you cannot talk of investments as government without bringing business together.
But Ambassador, let's use the Inga project as an example and as a case study. We're saying that the viability of the project in terms of its economic impact is clear. We're saying the viability of the project in terms of its social impact is clear. Where is the blockage?
There isn't any blockage. Because the blockage has been there for the past 3 to 6 years, I think, with Inga 1 and Inga 2. Now we're on Inga 3. Where now we are saying now we're delivering on that project. Because we are saying once Inga project is successful, the rest of the continent will be electrified. And whilst we're talking about that, Ethiopia also is putting up a dam to electrify it, assist to put into the grid of the continent, to electrify the continent. And the Inga project is one example of a project that Madame must start looking into the coffers of Barclays to assist, because us as government, we said we're entering into agreement with the DRC because we see the potential and the need for this, but we don't have the resources.
Yeah, well, Nozipo, I think often in the continent, and I think this is one of the things governments are going to have to accept, financing is not easy. And often the financing is not easy because of perceptions we've got to manage. Perceptions on, if I put my money there, will the contracts be respected? Will I be able to get my money over time? And often it's not about agreements, it's an issue of sentiment that you've got to work on over time. So I think a lot of these projects, why they always sound good, somebody says, you know, it looks like I could make money here, but will I get my money back? You know, is there stability? All of those things. And somebody recently put it well and said often what helps is doing the small projects that work, it builds confidence. So again, the point of do something.
Right.
If you only focus on the big projects, they're likely not going to happen, because somebody says, is my first project in a country I've not done business with going to be 5 billion? So
what about risk guarantee funding and putting government coming forward and development finance institutions putting the money forward to say we will take the first risk for other investors to come in?
The trick is nobody does business because they want a guarantee to pay them. You do business because you want the project to be viable. So if you do it on the basis that somebody gives you a guarantee, it then means there is an inherent risk in it. So there's always going to be those anxieties. And I think for me, that's where then leadership is required. Let's take the issue again of movement of people. East Africa has done it. You know, why can't it be done here? European Union has allowed free movement of people. Actually, it has shown that it
Somebody just said, don't forget Brexit. So we'll take that in. Yes.
But the point again with Brexit, you could see that even the Brits were divided. Young people and those living in London love being in the EU because it's gotten them into opportunities. There will always be the conservative people who don't want movement because they see progress as taking something away from them. And that's what I think is very dangerous, where you want to allow a few number of conservative people to determine what should be way forward. I mean, the things we're talking about, intra-Africa trade contributes what, less than 10% of the sub-Saharan GDP. Of the trade we do in the world, less than 20% is in the continent. On agriculture, that the ambassador was talking about, the statistician general says of the goods we consume in the continent, processed agricultural goods, only 10% are actually done in the continent. I mean, how difficult is it to process agriculture? We're talking juices here, canned fruits, you know, cheeses. We just don't do things that are that basic. And I think it's gonna need somebody to take the first step. But I think governments have a bigger responsibility to give people comfort that they can put in their money is safe, and they can get their money back.
So I want to quickly move on to the next issue that was raised that I don't want us to miss. And it links to the example that was shared about the SKA and a number of Ghanaian students studying at UCT now running the project in their own markets. For business, the movement of skills, not just the movement of people, but the ability to tap into skills in multiple markets becomes increasingly important if you're going to be competitive and globally competitive at that. How do we rethink how we are building talent to engage in this fourth industrial revolution, in this knowledge economy, in digitization, if we're still grappling with some of these issues around the movement of people? Do you have any suggestions, proposals that you would want to put on the table?
Okay, as a Pan-African bank, job mobility is very key to us, especially talent. Sharing talent across the continent. The key issue that, or challenge that we're faced is visas. You know, how do you get visas? So I think this is supposed to be a Pan-African discussion in having Pan-African business visas. Right, so it has to be obviously a proactive engagement with business.
What would a Pan-African business visa look like? I really want, Premier, for us to walk away here with some tangible ideas of things that we can go explore critically. Give us a little bit of nuts and bolts. A Pan-African business visa. I like the sound of it.
So to start off with, I strongly believe borders are man-made. Africa should be operating as one. Right, so the African Union is what we need to leverage on. So if a Pan-African visa is to be issued, I should be able to move across as a business person across the continent without having to pay for it, without having to apply. And at times it takes about 2-3 weeks. And I have to issue in my passport. Meanwhile, I need to be in another country on business. So that's really what we are looking for. One visa that can enable me to cut across the continent.
One visa cutting across the continent if you've got a skill or a talent that is required to participate in the fourth industrial revolution. I like that. Let's. So here's another idea: no visas at all. That is coming through. We have about 10 minutes left, or 5 minutes of the conversation. I'd love to get your voice in, and I'd also just want to take a final 1 or 2 comments from the floor before we begin to close. And I see the hands already. So, Madam, let me give an opportunity to reflect on the range of issues that we've raised so far.
Quite a number of issues. I think one of the most important ones that we didn't delve into deeply is the whole issue of two-way trade. It's not just about South Africa going outward into the rest of the continent. It's about what are we doing as South Africa as well to open up. And on a more practical level, we as Trade Invest Africa have begun those collaborations with our partner countries, business and government. We are now rolling out some inward selling missions as well from the rest of the continent, because it's one thing to say we've got a trade imbalance with the rest of the continent not exporting South Africa. It's another thing to have practical ways to bring the rest of Africa's products into the South African market. So we're working on that as well. We're starting now with Kenya and Tanzania in the immediate term, so that we can get products that are made in those countries displayed on the South African market, connect them with the retailers on a practical level, then have some contracts signed for imports into South Africa. That's our contribution to intra-Africa trade. Another important element as well on the investment side, because we are keen on driving South Africa's outward investment to the rest of the continent, we've also promulgated what we call codes of good business practice for doing business on the continent. Because we recognize that our private sector, they fly the South African flag. So we have to have sets of principles that guide the conduct of our business in the rest of the continent for them to be good corporate citizens and to build the strategic partnerships that have been spoken to contribute to localization in the markets they operate in. So that for us is also a very important instrument as well.
Right.
So whatever companies that we as DTI support, whether it's through incentives, financially, to go out into the rest of the continent for opportunities, we encourage them to subscribe to these codes. It's the only way then that we can have sustainable, strategic, win-win partnerships with the rest of the continent.
Codes of good business practice for South African companies going into the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm tight for time. I'm going to ask that the hands that we take now are short and sharp and to the point, and we'll allow our panelists to make a final comment as they respond to them. Madam, I hope you have a mic. Okay, there's a microphone there, so let's start with them, Madam. And then we'll take the second. We'll take the second, Madam, in a second. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mrs. I'm Ambassador Njai, Ambassador of Senegal, and I would like the Premier for giving us this wonderful opportunity this morning, and I wish we'll have it not only on May, but maybe every 3 months or 6 months, Mr. Premier. Thanks, Ambassador, for your statement on the Gore Island. And as you know, we are having a twinnings between Gore Island and Robben Island for this July coming. Also, we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the talk of Dakar, the first talk where people from the apartheid and people from ANC had their first meeting around the table in this symbolic Gore Island. It will be 30 years, and we are celebrating in Senegal from the 10th to the 15th of July, and here in South Africa from the 18th to the 22nd of July. You know, all of us, what is the 18th of July means for you. It's President Mandela's birthday.
Yes.
And next week, the 29th, DIRCO is hosting us. All ambassadors will be inviting. Some of them received already their invitation for pre-celebration of these wonderful twinnings. So culturally, South Africa and Senegal are working very well, and we are happy about that. In some other economic fields also, we are having a good relationship. I won't be listing them here, but we are looking forward to have a real wonderful partnership in education, industry, but also oil and gas. Senegal discovered a lot of oil and gas, actually. We are working with South African on mining, development, agriculture, DTI, you know us very well, but we are looking forward for more investors. And for that, government is ready. Senegalese government is ready. We created an agency, a special agency, that is here just to help investors to create a company, to have contact, and to go quickly and faster. And we always remind to South African investors that Senegal is in the French part, we can say that, of Africa. But we are trying, we are doing our best to improve the language problem. Because all of you, when you're talking, we are all talking about English-speaking countries. Don't forget French-speaking countries. We are part of it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, as we've closed off this conversation, I'm literally going to give each of you 30 seconds to make a concluding statement. And again, the statement is a reflection of what we've heard here today. But as the Premier has said, we need to have progressive conversations. What do you think is the single most important thing that we need to focus on in the next 12 months before we get to next May for us to have a progressive conversation back here on the stage? Ambassador, your one single most important piece of conversation that we're going to take forward.
My only contribution to to what you asked me to do, is that we need to look at projects that we can make follow-ups on. So that next time when the Premier hosts us here, we should be saying we have delivered on these projects. If there are challenges, what are those challenges that and how we can resolve those challenges?
Right.
On the issue of the Pan-African business visa, Madam, we're working on a Pan-African passport, which of course it will have its own dynamics. But I think at the end of the day, once we have that Pan-African passport, it will enable you to travel anywhere, anytime. Whether it's business, whether it's political, and otherwise sports, then we'll be in a position to do that. But what I would also like to do is that the Premier should also really concentrate into the North Africa. There are a lot of gas in that area, which I think Morocco sells it to Europe instead of coming to the continent. So we need to start looking into that. And I think Madam Mataboge, I'll task her to assist you in that project.
Ambassador, thank you very much. Mr. Zamxaka, 30 seconds.
Thanks, Nozipho. I think if anything else you forget, we have the Gauteng Investment Center on 1 Sentin Drive, which is one-stop shop for all the investment requirements you need. So we have Home Affairs, visa facilitation services, the DTI, the key municipalities. So a lot of the things we're talking about will actually facilitate there. We work already a lot with some of the embassies. We would really like to invite more business people and the embassies to work with us there to resolve some of these problems. Like visas, we generally tend to resolve them fairly quickly. But we're saying on the other projects, let's use that facility to take them forward. Thanks.
Madam Zienzi.
Thank you. Two things on the table that we can explore. One is to have a business, government, as well as maybe civil society roundtable, where we discuss on a maybe monthly basis. We've got different countries. They bring their opportunities, and then they can be explored. And I think it would be good if maybe the Premier can chair that if he's got the time. Since he's the champion, he's done a great job. So yeah, it would be good. And then have an index to track success. So when we come next time, we are now talking about the index. No one can argue with results. If the results are there, how many jobs were created, how many companies were established, in which countries, what are the barriers, what are the challenges, and how do we address them? And then lastly, the fourth industrialization, I believe it is going to be led by Africa. Africa has got the resources, things are happening, and we need to collaborate around that and make it a reality, especially on industrialization.
Right.
And then lastly, I had the opportunity to visit Gore Island. And the Gore Island, the history around it, it was really about economic development elsewhere. You know, the whole transatlantic trade routes. So we need to be able to say, how do we redeem that route so that we will be able to drive Africa forward? And then the last point, sorry, I can go on, but I think we really need to work together as one. There's a lot that can be done on the continent, and we need to work and not forget the diaspora. I think the diaspora has been raised. When we talk about diaspora, let's also go back to the history on Gore Island, the black Africans going there, who have been there. How do we bring them back onto the continent and help us build the continent?
Madam Lerato.
Thank you. I just want to echo the notion that, I mean, our continent is definitely rising. We don't have a shortage of projects. We don't have a shortage of opportunities. What we need to do much more is collaborate and coordinate much more effectively. Government and business must coordinate. Intra-governmental coordination on the continent needs to be much stronger. Businesses within the continent needs to collaborate. That's the only way that we can take advantage of all these opportunities that we talk about, and we can realize action. Because all the information that we require to get our continent to the next level is there. The how means we need to start working closely together and coordinating.
Well, on that note of coordination and collaboration, I don't think we could have ended the conversation any better. What is clear and what is coming out from this panel that has been exploring the role of government in strengthening, deepening and accelerating investment, regional integration as well as trade is that we need to make sure that we are connecting Johannesburg to Juba. We're looking from Gorée Island to Robben Island. We're certainly looking north, but more than anything else, we're collaborating and collaborating. I'm Nozi Pumbandra for CNBC Africa. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much.